We're joined by a team at Microsoft. And at this point, Rob, I'll turn it over to you to introduce today's presenters.
Thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Global Knowledge, for allowing us at Microsoft to meet with you all today. Pardon me. A quick overview of the folks you'll be hearing from. We are on the security, compliance, and identity, and we just abbreviate that as SCI, so you'll see that acronym throughout the presentation today. We're the security, compliance, and identity content team within the Worldwide Learning Organization at Microsoft. My name is Rob Linsky. I'm the lead for that team. You'll hear today from three folks on that team. Robert Stewart, who is a senior content developer. He is located in keeping with the new distributed workforce model that's become common in the last year or so. Robert is located in the Seattle area, as am I. You'll also hear from Brandon Neeb, who's a senior content developer on our team. He's in the Fargo, North Dakota area, and you'll also hear finally from Hassan Rashid, who's a senior content developer and is in the Chicago area. This is the agenda that we're going to move through today. I'm going to do a real quick kind of setting the stage about why security and security certification is important. You'll hear from Robert as he discusses our new certification for identity and access. You'll hear from Brandon. He's going to talk about two new certifications for information protection and for security operations. And then finally, Robert and Hassan will talk to you about two existing certifications we have in the security space, one for Microsoft 365 and the other for Azure. We'll wrap up with those and then move into Q&A. As Christopher mentioned, if you guys have questions, feel free to submit them. We'll try to get to all of them if possible. And in fact, some of them may get answered as I'm talking or as the other presenters are talking, but we encourage you to offer feedback, ask questions, and do what you need to do to get the most out of this. You can move us forward, Debbie. One more. Incredible kind of modern workforce shot there of everybody working in places that probably are not an office. You can keep this going. It's a great shot, though. That's I think the way it looks these days. Just a quick reminder that this kind of represents the Microsoft family of clouds. I'm going to add a small s to the word cloud. Really, that's what the landscape looks like for us, obviously for customers and partners these days. And you'll see that green kind of foundation, and what that really is saying is that around and throughout all of our clouds, our Microsoft clouds, identity, security, management, compliance are incredibly important, and those underpinnings run through all of those cloud and cloud services. So just a reminder, and frankly, it's a reminder for us at Microsoft too how important this is. In kind of extending the discussion about our kind of the new workplace that's emerged over the last 15 or 16 months, business was changing rapidly even before the events of the last 16 months. People were beginning to work on all kinds of different devices from all kinds of places and doing all kinds of work with all kinds of tools and data that were new and evolving and continue to evolve. Conventional IT infrastructure security tools have not kept pace. That's probably not a surprise to anyone. And as we read about in whatever your daily news source is, as there are security breaches, data breaches with large corporations, with government organizations, there's enormous cost associated with trying to fix and then regulate and manage and prevent further occurrences from happening. So we are in a much different place now than we were certainly 12 to 16 months ago, and certainly a much different place than we were a few years ago. Go ahead, Debbie. This is really meant to show what kind of a modern IT infrastructure is dealing with. Consider the organization in the middle. It could be anything. It could be a business. It could be a school. It could be Microsoft. It could be Global Knowledge. It could be whatever your organization is. And what you have now is just a collision of infrastructures, of clouds, of services, of devices of smart devices, of consumer devices that access corporate infrastructure, of personal devices that are used for work. People have multiple identities. They have a work identity, they have a personal identity, they have a brand, maybe an Instagram or a Facebook brand or whatever. Some people work from work, or from home rather. Some people go into an office and physically potentially connect to a network or an infrastructure. And all of these things are competing for resources and challenging IT infrastructure security, cloud security at all levels. This is the new normal, right? No longer are people going into a single office and attaching to an infrastructure, an organization's infrastructure through a hard line, through one connection on a single device. That's no longer the case. You see people in airports and, you know, in Starbucks or whatever your favorite coffee establishment is, and the first thing they do is they plop down and start a device and attach to an infrastructure that is likely open and not secure. And this is the challenge for IT security these days, is trying to make sense of all of this and attach some order and level of sophistication and protection to it. Go ahead, Debbie. So we're trying to help with this. Over the next few minutes, you're going to hear from folks on the security compliance and identity content team at Microsoft tell you about things like zero trust. Basically, zero trust is Microsoft's kind of out-front policy and approach to IT security. It's the one we use internally, and it's the one we're trying to help our customers and partners adopt. Zero trust basically means exactly what it says: trust nobody. The default is that everybody is denied access. The default is that everyone has to prove their identity to gain access to devices, to data, to infrastructure, to the network, and that they continually have to do this through authentication, through multi-factor authentication, excuse me, and that this is the new normal. Basically, you never assume that someone attaching to your infrastructure, to your resources, is who they say they are. You are always asking them to authenticate, to use authentication technologies. I'm having trouble with that word. And assuming that the worst can happen all the time. That's what zero trust means. And zero trust is sprinkled throughout our certifications and our content. You'll see it as a key pillar from Microsoft. Go ahead. Kind of last thing about this as we start to move into the content, Microsoft really thinks about security across all of our clouds and technologies and services kind of in 4 buckets, right? We want to verify and secure identity and secure access to resources. So we have a secure identity and access certification you're going to hear about in a few minutes. We want to stop people from attacking our resources. That's threat protection, right? Stop them, diagnose them when they do happen, counter them, and then prevent them from happening again. And then we have all of this valuable sensitive stuff, including potentially maybe your personal information or my personal information, credit card information, social security numbers, personal identification elements that are very sensitive. And we want to protect all of that and the applications that use that data. And then finally, there's the all-up cloud, Microsoft 365 or Azure. We need to safeguard and protect those clouds and all of the content and services and data and apps that reside in them. Those are the 4 kind of pillars of Microsoft's approach to security these days, and it's all inclusive around our entire infrastructure. So that's kind of what's going on in the security landscape these days. We're going to talk really quickly about certifications at Microsoft. Some of you may be familiar with these. We relaunched our certification program about 3 years ago. We have 3 tiers of that program. The fundamentals level, we actually have a new security compliance and identity fundamentals. We talked about that a few weeks ago in one of these engagements with Global Knowledge. Today, we're going to talk about our role-based certifications at the associate level. Those are the ones in the middle. Those are the ones that are all about using our technology and services in a particular job or job role. And we also have specialty certs. We're not going to spend a lot of time on those today, but those are really extensions to our job role-based certs that kind of take you deeper into a technology. As you can see down below, Microsoft.com/certifications goes into much greater depth about all of these levels of certification, what they mean, and we'll guide you through figuring out which certification level and role is correct for you. Keep going. Lastly, just a plug about certifications in general as a value element. You just see some numbers here that we've mined in the last couple of years. We're actually in the midst of doing another kind of reach out to our certified customers to find out how certifications are treating them right now. But typically, when people get certified, they get a salary bump, they get more responsibility, they might get a promotion. There's always been a correlation between getting certified and advancing your career, and there continues to be so to this day. A lot of folks, significantly over a third of folks who get certified, believe that it helps them perform more complicated tasks in a more confident manner. And again, over a third of IT professionals believe strongly that certifications now, especially around cloud technologies, help them use and utilize those services, deploy services, more advanced services, and typically make a greater impact with those services in their organization. So certifications are important, and we think you should explore these new security certifications in depth. Last slide for me, I hope. Actually, I may have two more, and I've taken too long. This is just a landscape of our, or a kind of a graphic rather, of our current certifications across Azure, security compliance, and modern work. What we wanted to show here is that the four certs at the bottom in the middle section there on the left that are in green, if you're able to see the green pop out there, those are the new ones. You're actually going to hear about the ones in the middle, SC300, SC400, and SC200. The two at the top you're also going to hear about. Those are the two current certifications that we have in the security space, one for 365, Microsoft 365, and the other for Azure. So those associate level certifications in the middle box there, we're going to spend the bulk of the time. And the new SCI certifications are focused on the three job roles at the right. As I mentioned, identity and access, information protection, and security operations. And the good news is that all of these certifications, obviously we have two legacy ones, you'll hear about those at the end of the presentation, and four new ones, including the fundamentals, which is down at the bottom. The exams, the learning paths, and the instructor-led material is all live. So you can learn about this stuff on Learn. You can go take a class from Global Knowledge, which we hope you do. And you can go take the exam. All the content is available for you today. So we're not talking about anything that has a future delivery date. So if you are looking to spring into action post this discussion, you can go start learning and certifying as early as the moment this call is concluded. And we hope you do. Robert, all yours.
Thank you, Rob. You can go ahead and jump to the next slide. So this slide is kind of a little preamble before the exam. Rob talked about the fact that in the current world, we've got people that are connecting from anywhere, any device, any location, any device, anytime, and we need to be able to centrally manage that. The tool provided by Microsoft is Microsoft Azure Active Directory, which will let you connect not only your employees, your frontline workers, but you can also bring your customers in and your partners into your Active Directory as well, and grant them access to applications and data as needed in a secure method. So let's move on to the next slide. And we'll talk about the new exam, Identity and Access Administrator Associate. This is the SC300, both certification and the training. Who is the right audience for this particular exam? If you're the person within a company that is doing administrative tasks around Active Directory, that's setting up, adding users, managing users, groups, granting access through conditional access, setting up multi-factor authentication, all of those troubleshooting issues when somebody can or cannot connect to their network, that would definitely be a target audience for this particular exam. But also think about it if you are doing administration work on Azure and are thinking about wanting to get into the security space. This is a potential place where you could move relatively seamlessly because you're probably already doing some work with Active Directory in that role. And it's going to be your end-to-end solution entry point for security from a zero trust that Rob mentioned is kind of the key that all companies are starting to adopt and evolve with. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. Within this certification, there are 4 functional areas or functional groups that you'll need to be prepared for from a training standpoint and from a certification standpoint. You'll see those 4 listed in the box across the top: implement identity management, implement authentication and authorization, implement access management for apps, and finally implementing an identity governance strategy. And the percentages tell you about roughly how many or what portion of the certification is going to be covered off on that topic. So within the implement identity management solution, we're going to start from the beginning. You'll learn how to set up your first Azure Active Directory for your company or modify the one that you already have. You'll learn how to bring in the different types of identities. Are those internal managed identities that are your users and employees? Are they external people, external customers and partners that you want to bring in? Or are they legacy user accounts that exist in your on-premises? All of those can be brought together into a single Active Directory, and that would be part of this role. Next, you figure out how to authenticate and verify that the person is who they say they are and what resources they have access to. So multi-factor authentication, different authentication plans that you can implement under that. How do you grant control using conditional access? And then finally, how do you ensure and protect those identities over time to make sure that while somebody happens to have a username and password, are they really who they say they are? Third area, you'll notice this one is a little bit smaller, is identity management for apps. So not only do your users and your devices get protected, but you also protect your applications, because those are the things that are going to be accessing your data. So you lock them down, you ensure that they're only doing what they can. And then the final section is identity governance, which is going to let you take a long-term look at how do we monitor the system over time as once we've got it implemented. You don't just build it once and leave it alone. You want to continue to monitor it, continue to review it, and make sure that you're applying those principles of least access, that when somebody does get compromised, that you know about it and you deal with that issue. And also, when you do get new users or need to change things up, you can grant them access to your systems in a secure and managed way. Let's go ahead and flip to the next slide. This is really just a quick slide that we'll spend 1 second on, saying Azure Active Directory affects everyone in your company. Even if you're not thinking about you're not doing day-to-day administration like the global administrator or the user administrator, even your person that does billing within your different companies will have access to Active Directory and have input into how it's configured. So think about the fact that everybody from your IT admin to your billing people are all users and of Active Directory and need to understand how it's working. We'll go to the next slide, and I believe it might be my last one. Where can you get content? Rob mentioned this already. There's going to be great training talked about through Global Knowledge at the end of this, but there's also supplemental materials that you can find on MS Learn. You can create your free Azure subscription today and go out and try anything on this. And there's a ton of content available on docs.microsoft.com about identity that you can look at. And I believe that turns it over to Brandon.
Yes, hello. Okay, SC200, Microsoft Security Operations Analyst. So whereas what Robert was just discussing as kind of the definitive cert on Azure AD, this, the SC200, is really kind of the definitive cert around Azure Sentinel. Okay, and so Azure Sentinel, what that is that is Microsoft's security, incident, and event management solution. So everywhere where you see this SIEM, pronounced SIM acronym, that is referring to Azure Sentinel. And so what you see in this slide is it talks about this is effectively the space that this cert lives in. So it's all about integrating alert signals from Microsoft 365 Defender and Azure Defender, as well as you see on this slide, has AWS and Linux. So it integrates those signals, those threat signals as well, into Azure Sentinel. And that is really, this slide is kind of the definitive story about what this security operations analyst role and cert is all about. If we can go to the next one. Yep. So yeah, this one just talks about how important it is these days now for integration of all the different threat signals. If you think about it, within your organization, you probably have a lot of different security solutions. You know, you have an email security solution for Office 365. You have Azure AD that's trying to protect identities. You've probably got other solutions that are trying to protect other things. So having all, you know, that creates a lot of different dashboards, right, to try to solve and try to figure out what all those different threat signals mean. So Azure Sentinel is really about integrating all those things and why that's really key. Next slide. So yeah, as it says here, the skills measured, mitigate threats using Microsoft 365 Defender, mitigate threats using Azure Defender. So the mitigation of threats really is the key verb. It's also about identifying, triaging, and then mitigating threats, as well as proactively hunting are the kind of handful of verbs that are really stick out here. Within the curriculum for this area, we are going to talk about Microsoft 365 Defender and Azure Defender in terms of how those products actually do detect threats. But the bulk of this cert is about integrating those signals into Azure Sentinel and then creating that automated response, which is one of the key elements that the Azure Sentinel service provides, is that when something happens or when an alert has been triggered and a threat has been identified, Azure Sentinel has the ability to kind of automate certain responses. So a lot of what setting up and configuring Azure Sentinel is all about is setting up that automation. What do you want to have happen in your organization, for example, when someone has logged on to 5 different PCs within 10 minutes of each other? You know, that's the kind of thing that is a suspicious activity. Azure Sentinel finds that that threat signal, and then it has you can set up what procedure should take place after such an event happens. So if we go to the next slide. So the 3 areas, so this cert has 3 functional groups. So like it says there, this is mitigate threats using Microsoft 365 Defender. Again, we don't go deep into configuring Microsoft 365 Defender. This is very much about that person, the security operations analyst, is that person who sits in front of a console each day and deals with, detects, investigates, and responds, just like it says there, to threats as they come in. And so this is very much, whereas MS500, the M365 security cert, that one's very much about setting up, configuring, determining how the Microsoft 365 Defender should be set up and configured. This one's very much about using, once that's already set up, using that alert and those signals and how to respond and remediate those threats. And then the second part in the middle there, that Defender, Azure Defender. So same kind of thing. It's not about setting up and configuring. A lot of that's taken place in the AZ500 cert. This one's very much about managing and configuring automated, like it says there, configuring automated remediation, investigating alerts, and what to do about them. And then the big difference here is even though you may be familiar with other certs that have Azure Sentinel as a component of those curriculums and certs, this one really dives much deeper into it. So in this one, like it says here, 40 to 45% on Azure Sentinel. So a lot of it is on configuring logs to be connected to Azure Sentinel, logs from other products, other even third-party services, like I mentioned at the beginning, AWS and Linux. So configuring those logs to be integrated into Azure Sentinel, and then using KQL as well. So even though it's not listed right here, the curriculum has you learn about KQL, which is Kusto Query Language, which is the system used to do identifying and searching for threats. Yeah, and then the automation, like I talked about earlier. So that SOAR acronym you see there, Security Orchestration Automation Remediation. So how do you want to set your system up? Do you want, like I talked about earlier in that example, if somebody's logged in on 5 different PCs within 10 minutes, do you want that login to be shut down? Do you automatically and instantly? Or do you want to trigger an alert where somebody goes and checks in with that person and make sure they so there's a lot of different ways to configure your automation, and that is what this is all about. Different organizations want to do different things. Some people want more productivity, and they want versus a trade-off of more security. So that's what this is about, is figuring out what those trade-offs are within your SIM solution. Okay, so next slide. And yes, okay. So that was the SecOps one. So now we are on to SC 400, which is another cert. So this is Microsoft Information Protection Administrator role. So in this role is different. So whereas that SC 200 person is dealing with alerts and then trying to solve issues, this administrator is more about proactive configuration and setting up of Microsoft 365 systems to ensure that your data within your organization is properly managed. So for example, look at this one, talks about built-in labeling protection, discover, classify. I'll let you read the slide. To think of this role, think of this example. If you're an organization that deals with security, social security numbers and credit cards, okay, that information may be on lots of different types of documents, maybe in lots of different places within your M365, within your cloud, right? And so what this system is all about is determining what is your sensitive information, okay? So configuring the M365 system to identify documents and content assets that you have that perhaps have social security numbers or have credit card numbers in them. And yeah, the way it does that is there's these sensitive information types that you define, and then there's some built-in ones. And once you've defined what those are, knowing your own data, you then configure labels and policies, right? So you label content and then you configure policies about what to do with that content once it's identified to have sensitive information in it. So if the system identifies some content that has, let's say, a social security number in it, should that content be encrypted or should it be locked down? Should people be able to copy and paste information out of a Word document, let's say, that has credit card numbers in it? And it also involves, secures that on the endpoints as well. So if somebody puts content onto a device that is outside of the organization, should that continue to be encrypted, et cetera. So that's the basics of what this role is all about. If we can go to the next slide. Okay, so here, like you see, the verbs are quite a bit different than what we've seen. The skills measured are all around implementation. So, and that's exactly on. So you're going to implement your sensitive information types based on the type of information your organization deals with. You're going to implement the data loss prevention policies that you feel are important or conform to regulations, right? You might be a healthcare or might deal with healthcare regulations like HIPAA and have very specific types of data that you need to set policies for within your organization to ensure that type of data is not lost, whether, through email or through just copying files, et cetera. So that's what this is all about. And then the last part of this is implement information governance. So let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so here's our 3 pillars, right, for this cert, and you can see the percentages there. So we talked about the first two: implement information protection, the data loss prevention, and then the third part is the implement information governance. So there's lots of regulations around the world about how long you need to hold on to data before it can be disposed of. There are rules about how long you need to hold on to it, how long you can hold on to it. So there's all sorts of policies, retention policies, as they're called here, that you attach to various content within your organization. And those policies determine how long the files are held, whether they're held for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. Those are all things you would configure. And then also there's things like holds that you can put on, legal holds that you can put on the content. So if there is an investigation going on a certain thing, those legal holds ensure that the content is saved. So those are the three pillars. This cert, again, it's all about really securing your data, and it's privacy focused, right? So the GDPR regulations for ensuring that user data is kept for a certain amount of time, and then it is available for for people to be removed at certain times, et cetera. All that stuff is related to kind of this information protection role. Next slide. All right, and that's all I have. I'll hand it over to Hassan.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Hassan, and I'm also a member of the Security, Compliance, and Identity team, and I have the distinct pleasure of briefly discussing the MS500 M365 Security Administrator exam. So this exam is very mature. It's still going strong. We just finished a refresh for this certification to make sure that the exam is aligned with all the latest product updates. So still very current, still very active. Who's this exam for? This is an exam for the security generalist in the M365 area, where some of the previous certifications that we were talking about are kind of for those specializing in certain areas of the security stack or the security portfolio. This is really for the generalist. It includes aspects of security, compliance, and identity all in one certification. So this exam is for the person who needs to have a good end-to-end grasp of all the various security technologies in an organization implementing Microsoft 365. So how they fit together, how those technologies fit together, how do you configure them, how do you manage them? This is a certification for the person who needs to understand all those different aspects. So let's keep moving. So looking at the certification skill areas, you see implement and manage identity and access. So we're talking about things like Azure Active Directory integration, privileged identity management, single sign-on, all those things coming into play, implement and manage identity and access. Next we have implement and manage threat protection. So you're gonna hear about things like the Defender technologies, Azure Sentinel. How do you connect all of those things? How do you make sure that the information is flowing and the people who are, for instance, specializing in monitoring those have the information right at their fingertips to do the detection and the investigations. But again, this role is more focused on configuring and setting those up. Implement and manage information protection. So you need to understand the basics of sensitive data types. How do you set up the data loss prevention policy? How do you, again, connect all those things, Microsoft Cloud App Security, all those different pieces of implement and manage information protection. And then lastly, implement and manage governance and compliance. So things coming into play here, auditing, reporting. How do you monitor for compliance violations? How do you search and kind of do some content investigations when you feel that there may be a compliance violation? All those kinds of skills coming into play in that last pillar, manage governance and compliance features in M365. So we can keep moving. And I'll toss it over to Robert for the AZ500 Azure Security Engineer Associate certification.
Thank you, Hassan. So Azure Security Engineer, AZ500, the exam's been around for 2 years, very similar to what Hassan was saying. I never know whether to look at this slide or the next one since it's been around for quite a while. The target audience is that person doing security end-to-end within Azure Similar to what Hassan was saying about the MS 500, this one is focused on a broad range, all of the security technologies that are available in Azure and what you might use them for to help you lock down and secure your system. So if your role is an administrator or a security admin on Azure technologies within your company, then this is a good exam for you. As also mentioned by Hassan, we did just do a refresh of the content, did a full review of the role to make sure that it was still applicable to in the real world and still existed. And a new version or an updated version of the training content will be out in the near future. We don't have a date yet. Let's go ahead and switch to the next slide. Just as an example, here's the different buckets of technologies that we will be covered. You notice here that there's identity and access, as you've seen in many of the exams. You'll see that identity here is 30%. So but it's also covered in about half a day to 2/3 of a day from a training standpoint, where identity and access administrator is a 4-day drill down into content. So you can see, even while this is a large percentage of the exam, the amount of content and the depth that we go into it compared to what's in the identity and access certification is quite different and still relevant, because this is, again, a generic role that once they finish the identity, they're going to move on to how do I lock down the networks and how do I do security for compute and storage, and for containers and other items. Then they'll move on to have a brief touch at security operations. They will not be going into any sort of depth like was in the SC200 exam that Brandon talked about. They're just going to be touching on what tools are available, how they work, and some basics on how to launch them within their systems, because that's kind of the role, is they need to be aware of the security operations piece, but they're probably not going to be doing that as their primary job. And then lastly is secure your data and applications. You'll need to lock down storage, you'll need to lock down your databases, and you'll want to have a way of securely managing items, whether they be secrets, whether they be security keys, or what else in your key vault. So that's going to be the different technologies that we cover. And I believe that's our last slide. Yes. Okay, think that's you now, Gidget.
Thank you so much. This is really, really helpful. We will be taking questions and answers. Of course, we're taking them now in the Q&A, but we will be taking questions and answers again at the end of the presentation. I want to talk to you a little bit about an offering that Global Knowledge has. We've had it for several months now. It's called the GK Polaris subscription plan. You can go to the next slide. So there's 3 levels of this. There's a discovery level, which is 350 plus instructor-led live virtual training courses for core skills and mission critical roles and our projects. And so this is the largest subscription. This means that you could take, a dozen Microsoft courses. It's not only Microsoft technology, but of course that's our focus here. So we've got some AWS offerings in there. We've got some cybersecurity in the offering as well. So there's a lot of instructor-led live that you can do for one price. Basically, it's about, I think it's $4 more than taking a single 5-day offering from a Microsoft perspective. Then there's the Accelerate level. And I wouldn't say that this is my favorite level, but if I had to pick a favorite, it might be the Accelerate and Discovery level, which includes Accelerate. And that is because not only do you get the courses that you would have in the Discovery level, but there is a component here that is called the Challenge Labs. And when you go to a class, you get you get labs that have step-by-step instructions for the most part. There's some things you may have to figure out on your own, but there's a lot of step-by-step, and that guides you through but you might not be really retaining that so well unless you're thinking about the different options. You know, you're choosing this option, but what's the difference between that one and another option? In the Accelerate level, these challenge labs have increasing levels to them. So you start out with something that's called the guided challenge. That gives you some hints, it gives you some instructions, but it's a little less than you might expect to get in a course. And so then the next level moves you on and you get fewer instructions. And then by the time you get to the top level, there are hardly any instructions. It's basically a scenario of things that you need to achieve. This is really helpful from a skills component as well as from an exam component. You may take an Azure exam, and on the exam, they open you up into the Azure portal and expect you to achieve something. Well, you don't have step-by-step instructions when you get to the exam. So as you move through these levels, you are becoming more competent and more confident in what you're doing, not only in your job role, but also if you're preparing to take the exam. And then we have the Polaris level that is called Launch. And these are some foundational courses. So let's say that you needed to really just learn something about cybersecurity. You don't have that, or you need to understand what IDLE is, or you need project management. So you can take these courses to help you fill in gaps. The Discovery level and Accelerate level also include Launch. So Launch is the lowest in terms of its cost, but it does have a lot of foundational courses in there. So it can help you skill up in an area that perhaps you don't need to be an expert, but you need to know something about it to complete your role. Next slide, please. So why Global Knowledge Polaris? It reaches beyond any single topic that you might be looking into. You know, you may need to, you may be the Azure security person, but you also need to know something about SQL Server, or you may be the person who is administering Windows Server, but you're thinking about moving into the cloud. So you are managing it on premise and you're thinking about moving into the cloud. So there's a lot of breadth, there's a lot of depth. You can choose between live, on demand, you can pick from a very large schedule that we have. The content is authorized. There's a lot of hands-on experience. There's literally hundreds of labs. Just for the IT Pro Challenges that we have, there are over 350 that are dedicated to Microsoft. So definitely something that you can work through and become increasingly competent in your job. We have a 95% learner satisfaction. You know, people may not be satisfied that 5%, you know, we would like that to be 100. But that 5% may not be satisfied because they chose the wrong course or because they prefer classroom and right now things are pretty much being delivered virtual. But it is a great value for your money and a great return on investment. Next slide, please. So this is just a matrix of, you know, what you might get if you were the Windows on-premise administrator and you're trying to become an Azure administrator. These are the different levels and things that you might take in those levels. So notice the white is what we recommend, and the optional is, and this kind of person might also need to know something about how IT trends are shaping the future of business, for example. So there are some things that we've identified in these learning paths to help you. And we are available. I am definitely available. I'm going to give my contact information. If you want to discuss this and you would like us to help you at Global Knowledge map out what your path should be, either in Polaris or otherwise. And this is just another example. So if you're a Windows architect on premise and you're trying to become an Azure architect, notice how many different things would be supporting you. Next slide, please. All right, so we'll open it up for questions and answers. Thank you again to the Microsoft team for all the valuable information. I think they really did a nice job clarifying what the different certifications are. So we'll take any questions.
Hi, Gidget. This is Christopher. Thank you for that. And thank you to the team at Microsoft. Kenneth Lowe had a question in the chat, and I'm going to toss it over to Robert. Robert, Kenneth asks if it's possible to give some examples of some roles at Microsoft that may be available for those who have acquired these certificates. And that came in reference to the SC 200, SC 300, and SC 400 offerings.
And others on my team can feel free to jump in as well. And I will say up front that I won't be able to give you exact job titles, although I'm sure you could go to Microsoft.com/careers and search on security and find quite a few related items. So at Microsoft, I'll first off just mention our team. Our team is always looking for people with security expertise or Azure expertise to build and develop security and training. So a content developer might benefit or be able to find a job within this space. We do have a huge security operations center within Microsoft. So that SC 200 would be one that would work that way. We have an IT staff that is continuously building and implementing our identity related solutions. We were one of the early adopters for Zero Trust. So that's a certification in that space may make you eligible to go into that particular role. We have M365 administrators, Dynamics, all of those. I apologize that I don't have the exact titles, but I guarantee you that if you look on our career site and search on security related items, you'd be able to find quite a few roles that are directly aligned to the different types of certifications. When we define our certifications, we use something called a job task analysis, where we bring people that are actually in the role to help us define what topics we should cover. And we generally bring people from Microsoft as well as those in the industry, so that we are certifying you to align to existing roles, which is why I'm confident that you'll be able to find stuff not just at Microsoft, but other areas as well.
Yeah, the thing I would add, Robert, thank you, you did a great job. The two other roles that jump to my mind are people in the support organization very frequently make use of these certifications, and our premier field engineers, people who go to the customer sites and implement solutions for the customers, also very frequently leverage these certifications and these trainings to get their jobs, to maintain proficiency in their job roles. So those are two roles that you could also explore: support engineers and premier field engineers.
That's a great point, Hassan. Consultants, kind of another offshoot of some of the roles that Hassan just mentioned. We have very tight relationships with Avanade and Accenture and other consultancies, technical consultancies, professional consultancies, and their folks typically are specialized into some of the areas that Hassan and Robert mentioned, and are also candidates for these certifications. I'd also like to just kind of drill down a little bit deeper on something Robert mentioned, which is the job task analysis process. One of the inputs to that now is a very kind of thorough analysis of what job titles exist and are connected to certain technologies and services on a variety of job boards. Obviously, LinkedIn is one that we call on a lot, simply because it's part of our Microsoft family, but we also do analysis on job and job postings across all of the other major recruiting and technical job site locations, and aggregate that data, and that has a heavy influence on how we position these certifications, what we call them, and the information that we include in each certification.
Thank you both for that context. And we do have time for more Q&A. If you've got a question, feel free to drop it in the question and answer box. Also, stick around for a promo code as a part of joining today's webinar. You will have the option to receive a discount on your next Global Knowledge course. First, here's the contact information for Gidget Pryor. Feel free to communicate with Gidget regarding any of your Microsoft needs or questions pertaining to Microsoft technologies, specifically Microsoft training and perhaps the security information that was delivered during today's webinar.
Interesting question. Two interesting questions, if I may, Christopher. One is from Susan, and I'll probably call on Robert here. What is the career outlook for identity and access management as a career? Is it something that's typically called out by itself or packaged, included in other roles? Robert, what are your thoughts on that?
I would say that we actually saw it in both cases when we were doing the job task analysis. There were quite a few companies that were looking for a dedicated role that wanted to do identity and access management by itself and focus onto that, because there are so many different technologies, from authentication to conditional access to MFA to identity governance, that you really need to be solid at. And once you start applying zero trust and least access privileges, those can be some pretty technical configurations. But it is a standalone role on a regular basis. But I've seen smaller companies look for somebody that's got this role as part of their admin, Azure admin and M365 admin. So you may see it combined together. But I think there's definitely a chance that you could continue to do this as a dedicated role.
And so I also wanted to add to Tim's question. It passed me by, but Chris answered you in terms of the fundamentals levels that would be appropriate for your sales teams. In addition, the launch level might be very appropriate for your sales team. I did not mention when I talked about Accelerate, I was so excited about the lab portion of it, that we have recently added a bunch of new kind of step-by-step labs as well as exam prep content there. And so the Accelerate level might be helpful just to go through kind of on demand, Tim, for your team. But definitely that launch level, being familiar with terms, understanding the terms, and then diving deeper into the Microsoft specific areas.
Thank you, Gidget. That's very helpful.
Any other questions? All right. Well, we hope to be talking with you again soon. Thank you so much for your time today and attending the webinar. And there's the course or the promo code for your course.
For those of you who are still on, take note of the promo codes on the screen. You will have the opportunity to save 25% on your next course with Global Knowledge. In the US, use webinar 25, and in Canada, CA webinar 25. If there are any additional questions, hopefully you've taken Gidget's contact information. I would like to give a special thanks to Rob, Brandon, Hassan, and the entire Microsoft team for their time, insights, and expertise during today's webinar. Thank you all, and thank you to Gidget. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day.